Tonkin. Thank you for joining us. Fertility New Zealand is a registered charity. We're committed to supporting all New Zealanders who face all fertility issues the whole way through their journey and beyond that journey. So we do that through providing information, support and advocacy. We'd love to help you on your journey, so please visit our website or call our 0800 line. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Lois Tonkin, who is a counsellor at Janea Oxford in Christchurch, and she has just released a book called Motherhood Missed. You can see some of her credentials there. She's internationally renowned, especially for her research in this area, and we're very fortunate to have her sharing her knowledge and experience with us. So I would like to hand over now to Lois, and she'll talk through her book.
Thank you, Nicola. Kia ora, everybody. It's lovely to talk to you all. The seeds of the, forgive the background here, I'm in a kind of a student flat because that seemed to be the best way to get the sound going well, not rather than in my office. So the seeds of this book started, years ago now, when I was working as a counsellor with women who were childless by circumstance. Many of those women talked to me how isolated and misunderstood they felt, and how their feelings of grief weren't really acknowledged by others in their lives. And as you will probably know, although this is a rapidly growing demographic of women, there's very little research about it and very little understanding about it. And so when I was going to do a PhD, I decided to do it about this topic. And in doing that research, many women told me how hard they find it to talk to anyone else about their situation and their experience. Many said to me how helpful it would be to read a book about other women's stories around it. I could have used what I found out from my experience, from my research experience, to write the book, but I decided not to do it that way because this isn't my experience and I didn't want to speak on behalf of women for whom it is. I think hearing or reading people's stories is very powerful, and I wanted them to tell the story of circumstantial childlessness, the story of trying to get pregnant, hoping that you will have a child, planning to have a child rather than people who've chosen not to, but finding that life just kind of got in the way and it hasn't happened for you. So for the book, I interviewed women here in New Zealand, and I also interviewed women in Australia, quite a number in the UK, some in the US and elsewhere. I talked to women in their 30s and some in their 50s and some in between. I talked to gay women and straight women and one trans woman. I talked to women who still hoped to have a child or children, some who were having treatment and some who had come to a point where they had decided that having children was clearly not something that was going to be part of their lives. And I'm hoping that there's such variety in these stories that everyone will find someone, or maybe several people, that they can kind of resonate with and that inspire or comfort them as well. Along the way, I met some wonderful women and made friends with those. Jodie Day, who was here in New Zealand a couple of weeks ago, or a few weeks ago now in November, and who started Gateway Women, which is a wonderful resource for women who are circumstantially childless. And she wrote the foreword for my book, and she's since become a friend. And another one was Jessica Hepburn, who's recently written a book called 21 Miles, Swimming in Search of the Meaning of Motherhood, which I also really recommend to you. Amazing book. I think thinking about it, the thing that struck me most in writing this book and talking with women is how varied and complicated their stories are. How, as one woman described it, messy life can be. How this experience impacts on relationships. What it's like when you didn't plan for things to be this way and yet you find yourself without children as a consequence of other choices that you made in your life. So their stories were all very, very different, and where they are on their fertility journey was different too. all of them talked about going through a long and often very difficult process of coming to terms with the possibility that children might not happen for them. And I know from my work as a counsellor at a fertility clinic how painful and difficult that process can be. And I don't need to tell any of you that. Along with the sadness, though, and along with that pain and that anguish for a lot of women, there are also many stories from women who've come through that to a point where they've created lives for themselves that they take pleasure in and that are rich and fulfilling. Many have done this by finding other ways to have children in their lives, or by being a mother in some other kind of way in the world, by teaching or counselling or caring for animals, being nurturing, investing in the future and those kinds of things, those kinds of ways of being a mother without having a biological child. And I think, though, that all of the women that had got to that point, many were able to say, I have a wonderful life. I love it. It really surprises me. It's not what I expected. And it's terrific. I'm really grateful and really value the life that I have. But that wasn't, they also said it wasn't that they had just kind of got past the grief around that and that's done with and finished now, so much as that's something that has become part of their life and that is not a dominant part of their life any longer. So that's the book Motherhood Missed. That's the stories. It's a collection of 32 women's stories, and what happened was that I talked to each woman, went and visited them, usually in their home, and talked to them, and we would talk for a long time, an hour and a half or so. And the publisher had asked for really short stories, just 1,500 words or so, which is really quite short. And so I had to really edit those stories down to be a much shorter story. And at the same time, I had to keep a sense of the book as a whole in my mind so that I was really insistent on using only women's words. So I didn't add in my own words, except occasionally I had to add in an and or something, to make it make sense. But I was insistent on using their own words and making the story as true as I possibly could to the way that it was spoken to me. And at the same time, making sure that there was diversity in the stories there. When I'd finished, I would send the draft of that story back to the woman, and she would read it over, and often it toed and froed several times between us before she was really happy with it being the story that was published, that it really represented her story. So that was the process, and I'm really grateful to those women for telling those stories. I think it's a useful book. I hope it's a useful book. I hope that it's the public conversations about this so that it isn't so much something that women feel private and sad about alone. I wanted to read a story for you from an Australian woman whose is a little bit of a different story. They're all different, as I said, but this is a story from a woman that wanted Claudia. Claudia isn't her real name. Most of the women wanted to change their story. And hers is an unusual one. She was one of the younger women that I interviewed, and she was at the point where she was really wondering what she should do, but also, well, forget it as I read. It's a fairly short story, so I'll just begin now. She says she's 35 at the point at which she told me the story, and she says, I can only speak from where I'm at the moment, because I'm sure it'll go somewhere else next week or month or year. My husband and I had a really tough few years at the beginning of our marriage. We were working through a lot of stuff. So I was 32 when we came to the point where we said, okay, we'll start trying for a baby. And I was just like, I'll just get pregnant. And I thought I was. There were a few little symptoms, and I Googled them, and it looked like I was pregnant the first time. I wasn't. And I was like, oh, well, shit, whatever. And that went on, and it just kept on going month by month like that. Every month. Am I? Am I? No. It was just a roller coaster because you'd get your hopes right up and then they'd be dashed. Eventually, I started taking pregnancy tests before I got my period because I couldn't stand waiting. After a year, we started getting testing, everything. They called it unexplained infertility, which is a kind of frustrating thing, but IVF was an option for me. Late last year, I quit my job. I'm a film producer, and I was at the point where I felt like I needed to take a back step in my career, which is a weird feeling as a woman to have, but I really wanted to have a child. That was my main focus. It's been my main focus for 2 years, really, and it's been very difficult. But through it, I also think I've learned, the hindsight thing, a lot of resilience. So I was going to start IVF originally last year, but I thought, no, I'll start it in the new year. And actually, I'm really meant to start it next week. But I sort of went into this existential kind of crisis is a strong word, but I started asking all these really big questions about why I was doing this. It got triggered by a film I watched. It starts off with these special landscapes, and then humans start getting involved, and then there's more and more people, and they're like parasites all over the earth, and they're just destroying the planet. It's a very bleak picture of humanity. And I just started asking myself, why do I so desperately want to contribute to that, to add more, to add another person to this world? Like, what is it about me that really wants to do that? The main reason I came up with was probably purpose. I'm certainly not discrediting anyone, someone who has a child, because I think I would totally do that in a heartbeat. And if I got pregnant, I'd have that child and be very, very happy. But it is quite an obvious way to find purpose. And maybe I have, I don't know, a different purpose. It's like the energy that you put into a child, you take that energy and you could put that into something else, whether it's adoption or charity work or your career or whatever. Is having a child the best way to fulfill my purpose here in this short time that I have on earth? I don't know the answers yet, but these are the questions. In some ways, over the last few months, I feel like I've been waking up a little bit, thinking about why I'm doing things. There are always arguments going around in my head, biological, logical, emotional, but there is a part of me that gets excited about the idea of not having children, what that means in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of like resources. There's so much need in the world. What could I do? The biological side of me sways towards having children, wanting to have children. And right now, I'm at the place where I'm swinging more towards adoption. If we could adopt, that's probably what we prefer over doing IVF, because IVF is like you're forcing the thing to happen. I mean, even if I did it, it may not work. So at this stage, I'm leaning towards not doing it, I guess. But then there's that question of whether I regret it in the future. Would my husband regret not trying? I think that's what scares me most of all about doing IVF, is doing it and it not working, which part of me feels like it might. Or even, what if we don't have children at all? That really scares me. It's a new road. It feels like you'd get a lot of pity. I understand that pity because it's like you've lost someone that you've never met, as though there's this amazing person who you could create, potentially, and you're longing for. It's actually a person, and you'll maybe never get to meet that person. So it's like a loss for something you've never had, or someone you've never met. I especially feel that loss when I get my period, where you get the bleeding, and of course, you haven't lost someone, but you've lost a hope, a possibility. Late last year, I went to a concert with my husband. It was quite powerful music, very cinematic, and I just kind of got lost in my thoughts. Suddenly, I had this very strong visualization of a little baby boy. I could picture what he looked like and his black curly hair, and I was holding him. A really strong image that's still with me. I still sometimes think about him, and I think, that's our son. I don't know where it came from, and I'm not necessarily saying it's a premonition, but it felt really nice. Like it was an actual physical person I could see and visualize. I sort of felt like that's our baby, like it was this beautiful creation between us both. And there are moments like last night when I woke up with this really intense sadness. I was feeling loss. And I was thinking to myself, because it's a weird situation, I've never lost someone really close to me. And when you lose someone that you don't have a choice whether you lose them or not, whereas I'm in a situation where I do have a choice whether I do or not, whether I lose that person or not. So I felt this sense of sadness and loss, but then a sense of having a choice, which makes it harder in some ways. But another way, it made me go, well, yeah, if you decide to take one path, then you're going to say goodbye to another. It's that thing of when you're trying to decide between two things. You don't want to miss out on something, but you are going to miss out on something, because if you have a child, you're going to miss out on career stuff and other opportunities to help people and travel, you know? But at the same time, if I don't have a child, then I'm going to miss out on that magical experience that no one can know until they've done it, of having a child. And it's like, is it worth it? I don't know. You can't know. So that's Claudia's story. And as I said, that's kind of an unusual story in many ways. They're quite different from some of the other ones. But then if I were to read another story, they would be different as well. Nicola, are you still around? I'm wondering if she's still there. You can see the book there. Here she comes. Hi, Nicola.
Hello. That was just lovely. Thank you so much. It was really insightful, and it was lovely to hear Claudia's story as well. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I just want to mention to everybody listening that we do have a group now. It's starting with a closed Facebook group, and we're hoping to offer some in-person events as numbers grow. So if you search for Childless by Circumstance group on Facebook, then you will find us. So thank you so much to Dr. Lois Tonkin for sharing your wonderful book launch with us. We'll all look forward to reading it fully. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Should I tell you about
Good
where
evening,
to get
everybody.
it if you're interested?
Oh yes, please do.
Yeah. Okay. So it's available as an audio book through Kindle on Amazon, or it's available just in bookshops here in New Zealand, bookshops overseas, through Amazon Book Depository, or through the publisher, Jessica King's publisher in England. But a lot of bookshops in New Zealand have, so you can access it that way.
Excellent.
Or libraries, of course.
Or libraries.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Lois, and thank you, everybody.
You're welcome.
Okay.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.